What a difference a year makes. Last year in July, I was on the phone for the first time with a man named Chris. He was calling from Washington State, and he was really excited that I lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because despite growing up on the West Coast, Chris was a rabid Eagles fan. And he told me that when we eventually met in person, he was going to take me to an Eagles game. Now, this is problematic. Number one, I had given up watching the NFL when Colin Kaepernick was effectively kicked out of the league. And number two, when I did watch the NFL, I was a rabid Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Now, Steelers fans and Eagles fans aren't exactly rivals because we're not in the same conference, but we don't exactly get along either. And going to see an Eagles game in person, well, that idea sort of made me a little pukey. But there was another reason that this could be problematic. And the reason is Chris was calling me from a prison in Washington State where he was serving time as a convicted murderer. So the idea of meeting this man in person and going with him to an Eagles game was sort of a trippy thought. Chris and I had been paired through a program called Empowerment Avenue, which matched writers, editors, and bloggers with, on the outside, with writers on the inside. Now, Chris already had a couple articles under his belt, and I have a past working with incarcerated people. So we were actually the program's first match. We were their beta. And although we had some broad guidelines that we were working through, we were basically making it up as we went along. Now, I had figured we would do most of our work through JPay, the prison email system, which is how I work with most of the writers and editors I work with on a regular basis. But pretty soon, Chris and I were on the phone at least once a week. And we didn't just talk about writing. He would ask about my husband and my kids and my cat, and I would ask about his fiance, who became his wife in the middle of a pandemic. And we would also talk about writing. Chris had dropped out of school in 7th grade. Well, he had stopped going to school in 7th grade. He had actually dropped out for real in 8th grade. But in prison, he earned a GED and an associate's degree. Writing came naturally to him, and he worked really hard at it. Writing comes naturally to me, and I work really hard at it. So aside from the love we have for our family and the love we have for writing and a commitment to social justice, it would seem like Chris and I didn't have a lot in common. But over this last year, this last very strange year, I have spoken to Chris more than anyone else except the people who live inside my house. So we got to know each other, and it was really lovely. But it was also difficult at times. During COVID, there was an outbreak in Chris's prison that devastated the community. He was one of a handful of prisoners who did not contract the virus out of hundreds. And because of that, he was put into solitary confinement to quarantine him away from the prisoners who did have the virus. Now, solitary is usually used as punishment in prison. And while the prison could have relaxed the rules surrounding solitary for those in medical isolation, they didn't. So we couldn't talk, we couldn't do our work, and we couldn't email. We were just separated for weeks, and I had no way of knowing when we'd be able to be in contact again. But eventually we were, and we've done lots of good work together since. But this year has been hard, and it's been hard for everyone. My family, thankfully, has skated by without much trauma, but there have been a lot of doubts. Were we gonna survive? What was it going to look like on the other end of the pandemic? Would there be changes for the better or changes for the worse? During the pandemic, we saw sides of people maybe we didn't want to see. And people came together in ways that were unexpected. I know when I look back on the pandemic, I'll think of watching movies on the couch with my kids, hiking along the creek in southern Lancaster, and having really intense conversations with Chris about personal responsibility, intergenerational trauma, and mass incarceration. Now, there have been some other doubts this year, and certainly some of my friends are concerned that I'm becoming friends with a convicted murderer. And if you asked me a year ago if I'd go to an Eagles game with someone I'd never met who was in jail for murder, I would have said no. But a year later, I can tell you, without a doubt, I am eagerly awaiting Chris's release from prison, his trip to the East Coast, and our visit together to an Eagles game. Thank you.